Okay, so what we are going to get to eventually is going to be something incredibly familiar. So sometimes the problem when something is too familiar, so you have to say, hold it, is that really there? And then you say, am I kind of forcing my will upon the text, or are we just noticing something which is staring at us? So, as I said, getting way, way, way ahead of ourselves. But first, look at what is here, and then we'll try to understand, if not even the problems, but the solutions. Again, I can start with some simple things. When God takes the Jews out of Egypt, he knows that we have a distance. He actually knows that there's going to be an issue with the Egyptians. He knows the direction he's taking is going to create some kind of drama, but he knows in order to get to Sinai, there's going to be a certain type of traveling, and a certain type of traveling is going to take up a certain type of challenges. Let's put it that way. I mean, if anyone knows about armies, I think it's between 80 to 90% of correspondence in all armies have to do with logistics. I think it's probably even higher than that. It's logistics and it's food and it's travel and it's all the simple things that you need to do and to take care of. So I'm just saying is that this should come of no surprise that we have some issues in terms of logistics that are going to have to be taken care of, and that's going to include food and drink and lodgings and whatever else we need for lots and lots and lots of people. So I'm going to say it again. The challenges over here are just completely anticipated, and that's by me, that's by us. And now you're dealing with the divine perspective. So then, of course, everything should be understood, which then really allows us now to ask the question: so why do the things in the parsha then unfold the way that they do? Which means if I had to look at this week's parsha, let's just say I took it away. I don't have this week's parsha at all. I don't have it. So what happens last week? We leave Egypt. What happens next week? We arrive at Har Sinai. Okay, perfectly good story, reasonable story, and I'll say it a little differently. If there were no intrigue, then we would have no reason to tell over the story. You never tell a story and everything was okay, right? No one ever says that, right? We never write articles like that and everything was okay next. No one cares when everything's okay. Everything's okay. That's not interesting at all. But I'm going to say it again. It's that all the challenges that we're going to have should be completely anticipated, so much so that you have to ask yourself, again, the question, so what is the divine plan over here? Because, again, it would seem to us that there really is, in fact, a divine plan. So that's, I think, what we need to uncover over here. Now, the first part of it to say that we're going to have the splitting of the sea, and the splitting of the sea is going to be something completely dramatic, and it's going to be something which is transformative. And I can keep on now on going in my description of it. I think that looking from the perception, again, the perspective of God in all of this, yes, that's an important part of the story. Which means we fool ourselves when we count that there are only 10 plagues. There is this 11th thing which takes place, and the 11th thing which takes place is ultimately going to be the end of the story, and that's an important end to the story. So that's certainly part of the plan. But and that's a very good and very positive part of the plan, even though we could begin to question that along the ways that there are some challenges. The challenges is the people's experience as they're being chased and hunted down by the Egyptians. And we have the night before, again, with a lot of drama, people not necessarily knowing how things are going to work out and feeling very, very vulnerable. And that vulnerability is quite important, because I'm going to say it again. Apparently, as part of this plan, is that the vulnerability somehow gets turned into, and now here I have my problem. My problem is what word to use. I'm going to use the Hebrew word for a second, and that word is emunah. The question is what the English word for that is. I don't know. What I will tell you, if any of you are interested, if you completely have too much time on your hands and you're somewhat masochistic, then you can ask me to send you a long article that I wrote about faith and belief. It goes on for pages and pages and pages and pages about trying to understand faith and belief within Jewish thought. I wasted so much time writing that article, and I did it because my publisher had asked me to, because another volume came out, which was a very successful volume. So I'm there with all these intellectuals, which ultimately means that if you are a pseudo-intellectual for long enough, someone may get fooled. I guess that's the conclusion. So again, if you're interested, I can send this, but that's part of the issue there in terms of faith and belief, and what are the Hebrew words for this. And are we dealing with emunah? Are we dealing with trust? Some people say that's bitachon. Are we dealing with faith? Are we dealing with belief? And I'll just say, and this goes back to my article, I think that understanding in the general world, so we go to the Jewish world. In the Jewish world, we have to unpack all the sources, but in the general world, I think these things change before and after the scientific revolution. I think when we start to get to modernity, questions of faith versus belief tend to change, and or at least the way that they're used in certain battles against religion. So we'll leave it at that. Maybe now that's intriguing enough to know what I'm talking about, but that's enough. Nonetheless, the Jews are being chased. The night before, something really incredible happens, and I discussed this the other day, and that is the wind blows all night, and suddenly there's no more water. And when you're stuck probably in a peninsula with water on every side and there's no place to go, so that's again completely devastating, because what you see in front of you is no hope whatsoever, again, unless you have something else. And what's that? Emunah. So if you have emunah, then things are somehow going to work out. Now the question is, should they not have emunah? So I don't know if I want to discuss that. I could argue that after the 10 plagues, maybe they absolutely should have emunah, but maybe it depends on you if you're an optimist or a pessimist. How many more? Again, everything comes back to the Wizard of Oz. What else do you have in that bag? What else can you do? And have you already run out of the miracles that could take place? This situation seems precarious. Vayet Moshe et yado, and I do want to stress something. I bolded the word yado, and that's simply because I want to be able to double back to this later on. Vayet Moshe yado al hayam v'yashav hayam lefnot boker le'itano u'mitzrayim nasim lekrato v'yane'er Hashem mitzrayim b'toch hayam v'yashuv mayim v'yachasu et harechev et aparashim lekol chel paro ba'im achareim bayam lo nishar behem ad echad. So again, the miraculous description of the splitting of the sea was not the entire night where the wind blows and the water seems to somehow disappear. That probably looked quite naturally. Haaretz's op-ed would have been that Moshe misled them, and somehow Moshe is incredibly lucky and somehow was saved. I mean, that would be the idea. But again, we understand that the main thing about a miracle is like the main thing about telling a joke, and that is timing, that you have to say the joke right before people laugh. Over here, the same thing over here. The miracle is you need to do this at the right time. And the fact that this particular time, being stuck and then having the water disappearing, but more importantly, the more dramatic is Moshe lifts up his hand, and the Egyptians who have followed in what is now dry land, and they get then covered with the water and shooken up also. I don't know, is that shaken, not stirred? Is that what it says? Lina'er, right? That's what it says about them. So all shook up. That's what it is. Vayosha Hashem bayomahu Yisrael miyad Mitzrayim. And God saved. Vayosha, salvation. Good word. God saved Israel that day. Again, from the word miyad is interesting, from the hand of Egypt. So you have this play off of the hand. Moshe lifts his hand. God saves from the hand of Egypt. Vayar Yisrael at Mitzrayim meit al sfat hayam. And Israel now has seen that Egypt is dead. On the banks of the river, they see that, again, this is finality. This is over. It's at this moment they really understand that the years of slavery are over. Egypt is over. Vayar Yisrael et hayad hagdolah. Now do you realize how many times the word yad has been used over here in these sentences? And now they see the yad hagdolah. Now, yad hagdolah is a really interesting word, because all of us rationalists would immediately call this an anthropomorphism, correct? So therefore, right? You know how to say that in Hebrew? It's a very good word in Hebrew. Ha'anasha, giving God human qualities. Ha'anasha. What? Ha'anasha, not punishment. Ha'anasha, turning God into, again, human qualities. That's why the whole concept is challenging. And the Rambam goes against this, and the Ravid argues with him about this. Can you even describe God within terms of having some kind of a body? Again, if it's all metaphoric, then perhaps. But what can you do? The Chumash does. So we'll see something interesting about Onkelos in a moment. But
why the Jewish people had to see the Egyptian
תגיד בעברית.
שהם מתים, כלומר רואים אותם
Apparently, it was therapeutic. Sometimes for therapy, we need to do all kinds of extreme things. Apparently, that said. By the way, that's exactly my point, because I said I could have ended last week's parsha and go straight to Har Sinai. I don't need any of the stuff in the middle, but apparently we do. So I'm saying this finality apparently is something which needs to take place. And excuse me, closure. But there's something else, and that is, and I want to go back to the scars. The scars are they threw Jewish babies into the water. They threw Jewish babies into the border. And therefore, the closure over here is when God judges midah keneged midah, God judges and does the same thing to them. That's something which is a very, very powerful message. Most times in this world, we don't see God's hand. That's exactly the point. Most times in this world, we don't see God's hand. We don't see God's judgment. We don't see how things work out. We don't see how God is micromanaging and involved. And over here, to see that micromanaging, again, to the point, look what they did and look what happened to them. And now you all see, okay, that's the hand of God. Again, that's exactly the point over here. To continue, okay, again, Vayar Yisrael Tayad Gasha Sa Hashem b'Mitzrayim, Vayiru Ha'am et Hashem. Now that's really interesting. They had fear of God at this point. Well, by the way, I can understand that, because if you now understand that God micromanages and there's midah keneged midah, I would understand why that can lead to fear of God. Vayaminu b'Hashem, and they had, now we have that word, Vayaminu b'Hashem uva Moshe avdo. So I suspect that we're familiar with that verse. We bump into it more than just once a year. Vayaminu b'Hashem uva Moshe avdo. I also want to ask something else. I think I'm willing to be corrected on this. I think that there's some ambiguity, deliberate ambiguity, in the beginning of the sentence. Vayar Yisrael Tayag Hashem b'Mitzrayim. Is he talking about what just now happened to Egypt, or is this in retrospect? Now they understand what God did in Egypt. Vayar Yisrael Tayag Hashem b'Mitzrayim. Vayiru Ha'am et Hashem vayaminu b'Hashem u'Moshe avdo. So b'Mitzrayim over here doesn't mean to the Egyptians who are now lying on the side of the water, on the banks of the water, or is it talking about what God did in Egypt? And as I said, I'm sensing over here ambiguity, and I absolutely believe that when a divine author leaves us a text with ambiguity, then it's absolutely part of the plan to have that ambiguity, and therefore it suggests that again, two levels of this. When Rav Lichtenstein spoke about text sometimes having two levels to it, he talked about Shir Hashirim, and then he said like in Spencer's Fairy Queen, which of course none of the yeshiva bachrim had ever heard of. So I guess some guys in English went running over to find out what in the world the Fairy Queen was. But that's what he said. But I believe over here there are two levels to this. The one level is that they see in front of them the dead Egyptians, but that triggers something within them, the understanding of everything which had happened till now, and now they understand the hand of God was at every single point here along the way. And that's really a great thing about emunah. Again, whatever the word emunah means, that's a great thing about it, because emunah, again, we can always think about these issues. Are they present tense? Are they about the future? Or do they let you also reinterpret the past? So I think that there's something really interesting over here about this emunah, and that is that right now they certainly have this emunah. Part of the problem is going to be is it sustained? What's going to happen over the next couple of chapters? What's going to happen over the next 40 years? Which means how easy is it to sustain emunah? How easy is it as you move on to the future to remember the feelings and the understanding of what happened at that particular moment? If you note the target, so and again, I'll say it, emunah has to do with the past, the present, and the future. That's part of what it is, and that understanding or observation is actually very important in terms of also everything else that we're saying today, because something can happen right now, and now you reinterpret the past, and now you have emunah moving forward towards the future. Again, sustaining it is not always the easiest thing. The Targum Onkelos here says, "V'chazi Yisrael yad gvurat yada rabta," which is really interesting, because generally the Targum moves away from anthropomorphisms. It's like, I just assume all of us do Shtayim Mikra Ve'echot Targum, right, for the last 40, 50 years, or maybe some of us missed a little. But if you do it, then you get this understanding of what he does and how he does it. And I'll say it again, just in case you weren't able to put your finger on that. He stays away from anthropomorphisms. And the fact that he did not over here is really interesting, which means even though, again, 99 out of 100 times he will not do this. And over here he says, and they see, Vurat Yad Rabta, right? They see the great hand, Davar Hashem in Mitzrayim, Udchilu Amma min Kadum Hashem, Vihiminu Bimemra de Hashem, and they believe the words of God. So it's interesting. He added the words, Uneviut Moshe Avde, and the prophecy of Moshe. So again, normally he's word for word and quite literal, but over here you see in the second half of the verse, he does understand that this is somewhat metaphoric, and therefore he gives a little bit more, and he turns it into concrete concepts, as aside from something which is more amorphous in terms of visions, but it's concepts. You can argue with my use of amorphous. The Mechilton, source number 3, says, Vayaminu b'Hashem, Gedola ha'emunah she'aminu Yisrael b'misha amma v'haya ha'olam. So great was the emunah. Do you have this desire yet for me to translate into English, or are we good with the Hebrew?
But just want to clarify, when you say that emunah refers to past, present, and future in this time, is that always true?
I don't know. I think potentially. Because again, because you can correct me and say, no, emunah has to do with this moment right now. But the question is, at this moment, when you have that emunah, that means anything in the past now, you've reinterpreted because of the present experience. And at this moment, you have faith in the future as well. So I think that emunah is about the past, present, and future. And I'll say it again. The challenge of sustaining it over time is going to be a whole nother challenge.
But are you proving it with the geography that when it says Mitzrayim, they're not really in Mitzrayim anymore? So it has to be the past included?
Proving is such a strong word. I'm suggesting. Vayaminu b'Hashem. The Mechilta says, Gedola emunah she'aminu Yisrael b'misha amma v'haya olam. So great was the emunah that they had in who spoke and the world came into being. Now that's really interesting, because we can just begin to question, okay, they know that there is a God. They know there's one monolithic God. They know that this one monolithic God is involved in history. They know that this one monolithic God has taken them out of Egypt. But how much do they know about the theology of creation? Now, you can respond to me and say, well, it's obvious. If there's one monolithic God, then, again, by extension, creation as well. But I just find this comment about creation really interesting. So let's file that on the side for a moment, because it could have said that they believed in this God who just now saved them from Egypt, which means now you've extrapolated and gone back, and again, going back to the past. You're taking the present situation and now you're saying, hold it. If this is God who's all powerful, then hold it. Where did the world come from? So God must be involved in that as well. And I'm going to admit something. I'm working too hard right now, because I think it's just a general turn of phrase that one would refer to God as, but nonetheless, it is fair, because you can refer to God in various ways. And the fact that this midrash chose to use this turn of phrase to describe God, I think, is significant. But then it tells us something. Shebischar shehiminu Yisrael b'Hashem, out of the reward that they received for this emunah, sharta aleim ruach hakodesh. So just like we saw the Onkelos suggesting a moment ago, that now they had emunah in Moshe's prophecy, in the word of God in Moshe's prophecy, which also we realize there's a correlation, that at this moment they had rained upon them this ability to have Ruach HaKodesh at that moment, which suddenly they're seeing things in a way which normally people don't see. Shenema v'yaminu b'Hashem of Moshe Avdo. So therefore, it's understanding this emunah is connected with this. It's seeing something divine, and it's suggesting that to see something divine means that you right now have Ruach HaKodesh. Now, I'm going to say it again. This is really interesting. If you need me to strengthen this a little bit, I'll strengthen this by saying that when they start to sing, okay, and the next words in this midrash, v'nemar, az yashir Moshe b'nei Yisrael. What's the az? The az is once they receive this divine gift on them, now they're able to say this magnificent song. But what does it say in the az yashir right after this? Az yashir Moshe b'nei Yisrael. Okay, Ashir Hashem Kiga, all right? Sus Rechoram, Ze, Ze, that's the interesting word. Ze Eli v'anvehu. So it's suggested, if you look at the commentaries, Midrashim, when they say Zeh, they're pointing a finger. Matzpia ba'etzba. Zeh. Zeh Eli vanvehu. That's where we learn that was greater the vision that people had. Sometimes it says, some of the texts say, even a servant woman had, at that moment, was greater than the level of Yeshayahu. Sometimes it says Yeshayahu or Yecheskel together, that they had a greater understanding than what's called the Maaseh Merkavah. Why? It's because of the one word, Zeh. Zeh. Zeh Eli V'anvehu. That is my God, and they're pointing a finger. So now if I have to go back and say, oh, this song was some kind of a divine words are coming, if you want, divine ventriloquism, that somehow they have this ability to say things that they should not be able to say, it's because they saw something which they should not be able to see. So again, it's interesting because there's actually two stages. Because one stage is that they see the hand of God, the strong hand of God, and the punishment of the Egyptians. And at that moment, they have emunah. But the emunah, now they're able to sing this song as well. And when they sing the song, it's because now they have this Ruach HaKodesh. They're able to point their finger and to see something which normally a person would be unable to see. So the description over here really is, again, I'll say it, I think is really impressive. V'chein tamotzi shelo yarash Avram Avinu olam hazeh v'olam haba ela b'zchut amana she'emin b'Hashem shenemar v'hamin b'Hashem v'yachshaveu lo tzedakah. That Avram had emunah, and everything that Avram had was because of his emunah. So I'm just going to note one thing about this emunah of Avraham. Where is this written? It's written in Bereshit chapter 15. What's written immediately after Bereshit, in Bereshit chapter 15? The Brit Bein Abtarim. That comes immediately after this description that Avram had emunah. So now you realize that you have something which is either poetic and again, theologically breathtaking. You can say it's poetic license, poetic beauty, really. It's that this emunah that Avram has, and then the Brit Bein Abtarim are going to be slaves, and so, but I'm going to judge the people who are going to come out. And the judgment, as we've seen, is understood, partially involved the punishment to the firstborn and of the splitting of the sea and the punishing of the Egyptians. That's the punishment. That's the nation will be judged. And they come out of this emunah, which is where Avram was when the whole thing begins. So it seems to be that this whole thing, I'm not saying exclusively, but this whole experience from Bereshit, Perek Tetvav, to Shemot, Perek Yedalid, is all about giving over Avram's emunah to his descendants. And now they've walked out of it and they have that kind of emunah. And therefore, when we need our title for today, I'm going to build up to tell you the title. But Avram got in on the ground floor on the greatest enterprise in history, and that is the understanding that there's one God. People can get involved in corporations on the ground floor and then make a lot of money, which some people think is a very important thing. But Avraham, it's interesting, he gives over as our spiritual legacy, our inheritance is, we're all, let's put it this way, we're all trust fund kids. That's what we are. But this is a different type of trust fund. This is that we all inherited the trust that Avram had. We all inherited Avraham's emunah, and that we see now coming, being manifest when we get to the other side of the water. That we came out of this okay. We came out of this with this emunah, and I'm going to say it again. The challenge of this being sustained, continuing from even the next couple of days, as we run out of our supplies, and the logistics now are going to become very challenging. What's going to happen now? Ken, בעברית.
למשל, הוא לא יוכל לעבור תפקיד או דבר כזה, אז השם עשה לו את זה. מצד שני, אתה יכול להאמין בהשם, very logic, זה השם, אבל זה תלוי בבן אדם כמה הוא, הרמה שלו באמונה. כלומר, אם הוא היה למד, כשהיה קטן, למד אמונה, אז הוא לא צריך יותר מדי סימן להשם, להשם, להשם. ולכן, בגלל שהם, כשיצאו ממצרים, אני גם לא מאשים אותם, הדבר שלהם באמונה היה נמוך. אני לא מאמין כל 400 שנה להיות עבד, אתה צריך משהו ממש...
Dramatic. And that's why we said before that they needed the therapy. They needed this experience on the other side. Rashi says that Yad Gdolah, and again I'm reminding you that the word Yad was there one time after the other over here, that the Yad Gdolah, et Hagvura Hagdolah, Sha'asta Yadu Shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. והרבה לשונות נופלים על לשון יד, וכולם לשון יד ממשן, והמפרשו יתקן הלשון אחר עניין הדיבור. So he admits that the word yad, I'm going backwards here almost, could be used in lots of different ways, but he says over here it means that God's great strength, God's being involved in history, is what this means over here. The Rashbam vayaminu ba'Hashem, sha'af b'midbar lo yamutu bira'av. Do you see what the Rashbam just did? He took it to the future. He said that right now they had emunah, that meant that they'll be okay moving forward. We're going to be okay. Everything's going to be okay. Why is everything okay? Because of what just now happened. So that's why when you ask me again about, okay, what tense does, or what does emunah affect, that it's really interesting what Rashi did is in a sense, Rashi's going backwards. And or present and I think backwards, and what the Rashbam is doing, it's almost like he's ignoring right now. What does that mean that they have emunah? It means everything's going to be okay moving forward. That's what emunah means as far as the Rashbam is concerned. And this reminded me of something. It reminded me of Yirmiyahu in source number 6, Perek Bet. Halach v'karata b'oznei Yerushalayim limor kol amar Hashem zacharti lachesed ne'urayach avat k'lotayach lech techach harai b'midbar be'eretz lo zurah. That when you left Egypt, God says, I will always remember that kindness, interesting word, that you followed me off to the desert, a place which is nothing's planted, that's exactly the problem. We're going back to what I said in the beginning. Logistics, food, water, right, lodgings. It's not the simplest thing to follow off. So I'm really tempted to connect this verse in Yirmiyahu together with what the Rashbam says over here. And that's the level that they're on in this particular moment. Rabbeinu Bechaye, and what's interesting again, he's going to make a really broad general statement, but he's saying it here, right here, right? You'll see it. Rabbeinu Bechaye, Perek Yud Daled, Pasuk Lamed Aleph. What was that? Vayari Savu Yad Gdolah, right? Vayaminu B'Hashem Moshe Avdo. So on that, he has this long discourse about emunah. Ubnei shemunah yisod kol haTorah kula. Teknu lanu razal b'tfilah uvrachot lanot. Amen. So he just now connected the word emunah with the word amen. So when we say amen, what we're saying is that we have emunah. We're confirming, we're agreeing. Shehu nigzar milashon emunah, milashon hoda'ah, shemakabel lav divrei hamavarach umodeh bahem. I accept the words that were said by the person who said it, and I agree to them. And he goes on to say, to go on to talk a bit about the greatness of and the importance of emunah. Shmot Rabbah, again, commenting on this area, it'll tie things a little bit tighter than we just now saw in the Mechilta. Amar Rabbi Elazar ben Rabbi Yossi, kishiyagiu agoliot l'sham yu omrim shira. This is talking about the future, that when we get towards the end of the exile, there's also a song to be sung. L'kach nemar tishuri mirosh amana. So just those of you who don't immediately recognize this, probably it's because you're not among those who say Shir Shirim every Friday before Shabbat. So in source number 9, Iti milvanon kala, iti milon tavoi, tashuri mirosh amana, mirosh shnir v'chamon, mimanot arayot miharei nimerin. So I gave you the English translation here of what I think is the simplest level of understanding, but again, Shir Shirim has more than one level of interpretation. Come with me from Lebanon, my bride, with me from Lebanon. Look from the top of Amanah. So you see it copped out, and it decided that Amanah is the name of a mountain and didn't go into anything else here. From the top of Snir and Hermon, from the lion's den, from the mountains of the leopards. It could be that in terms of what's going on in the world today is that maybe all of this is a little bit more significant. But look at Rashi on Shir HaShirim, and then we'll get back to the Midrash. Teshur mirosh Amanah. When all the exiles will be gathered, תסתכלי ותתבונני מה שכר פעולותיך מראשית האמונה שהאמנת בלכתך אחרי במדבר. Rashi takes it right back to what we understood to be in the Rashbam. He says, no, the emunah was right there. Again, so essentially he's agreeing with what the Rashbam had said on the verse that we're going forward. And then he goes on, he says, but no, there could be a second interpretation as well, and I'm going to leave this, maybe I'll just read it. They get to the point you can see the borders of Israel. Avira shel Eretz Yisrael. I don't know what that means. You can see the Avira of Eretz Yisrael. I don't know what he means, but I like it. Usmechim, and that turns into joy. Va'omrim hodia lekach nemer tashur mirosh amana, and that causes this incredible happiness, and therefore what happens? Tashur mirosh amana, you start to sing from the top of this mountain of belief. So if you go back now to Shemot Rabbah, you'll see that he says that in the future they're going to say Shira lekach nemar tashuri mirosh amana. Davar acher tashuri mirosh amana atidin yisrael lomar shira latid lavo shenemar shira laShem shira chadash kinu leflot asa uve'ez zchut omim Yisrael shira. On basis of what can we say shira? B'schut Avram shehemin b'Kadosh Baruch Hu shenemar ve'emin b'Hashem. He ha'emunah sheYisrael nochalim ba. That's our inheritance. Now we go back. This is our trust fund. We go back. This is what Avram gave to us. Heavy, what does that mean? Tashuri mirosh amana. So again, what's interesting is it's taking this idea of the emunah as belief, the importance of belief. Again, I broke what I said before. I don't want to translate this into English. The emunah, belief, trust, faith, whatever word you prefer. But I'm going to say it again. We keep seeing that leaving Egypt was about instilling something deep inside of us. And at that moment, everything made sense. Walking off into a desert with God made sense. Everything makes sense because look what God does, look what God can do, look at the Yad HaGdolah. So everything makes sense at this point. I'll tell you really what the issue is. The issue, and I don't want to say it in a mutually exclusive way, the question with Emunah in my mind is it something which is centered on the mind or something centered on the heart? Or, as I said, it may not be mutually exclusive. It could be a faith is something which is more in the heart, and it could be belief is something which is more of the mind. And maybe that's, when we're translating it, that's what's taking place. What is more? Is this more of an emotion? Is this more of the intellect telling you the logical conclusion based upon all of the information that you've been able to take in? I will point out that again, I keep saying that this issue of emunah is going to travel with us all the way through, and I just want to note a couple of things. One is Bamidbar chapter Yud Aleph, which is in source 11. This, as we've always noted, is where things go chapter 11. Chapter 11. This is where everything starts. Everything was good until this point. In Sefer Bamidbar, here's where things start to go wrong. The people have desire, hasafsuf, bikirbo, etavu ta'ava, and they want food and this, and they start complaining. But what do they complain about? They complain about the man. In this week's parsha, we're going to have no food, and so the man is going to come down and it's going to solve our problem. And over here, we find them complaining about the man. And it's interesting what Moshe says, and that's back in all the way to Pasuk Yud Bet there at the end. Anochi ariti et kol amazeh, Menochi alatiu. Did I give birth to them? Ki tomar elai sa'ehu b'chekecha kasher yisa ha'omen. So the question is what ha'omen means. Omen is like a nurse, but somebody who instills within a child the basic emotions and intellect that a child's going to have. And I have no problem understanding when Moshe says, am I supposed to be an omen? And God's answer to that is yes. And the next chapter, interestingly enough, it says, Lo kain avdi Moshe b'chol beiti ne'emanhu. And the word ne'eman and the word omen, these are all connected. And remember, where did this come? This came after everybody or a whole bunch of people experienced prophecy, which is really parallel to what we just now saw by the Shira. And then Miriam says, we're also prophets. And God says, no, you're not also like Moshe. Moshe is on a completely different level. So again, I'm just noting that there's almost like bookends which are taking place. The other thing is that Moshe's eventual end of his career is going to come in when God said to speak to the rock, and he hits the rock, which, by the way, is also in this week's parsha. I mean, it's the same episode, not the same. The same motif is there in terms of talking to the rock and so on. But when that happens and Moshe hits the rock, and then what does God say to him? Because so the word emunah, I'm going to say it again, is just going to completely follow us. Moshe's job is to give people faith. Moshe's job is to instill within people this type of emunah. And God essentially, and Moshe says, am I supposed to give them emunah? Am I the omein? And God says, yes. And b'chol beiti ne'aman. And that's exactly what vayiminu b'Hashem Moshe avdo. When an episode comes up and Moshe does not instill within them emunah at that moment, at that point God says, okay, you no longer can continue, because that's essentially what your job is. So I just don't want you to think that you've understood everything yet, because again, this theme is there. It's going to stay with us until the very end. Let's continue now. So we have a problem. And what's our problem going to be? Our problem is going to be that we're going to walk off like a lovesick bride, following off the damsel in distress is going to follow off the knight in shining armor, and then very quickly we're going to find out that he does not have a place for us to stay, that he does not have food, he does not have supplies, and we're going to start complaining. One good thing about that complaining is that it does say they cried out to God, which is something we noted was missing during the times they cried. In Egypt, they cried. Now they cry out to God. So I think that is significant. But let's go over to chapter 15, Perek Vav, source 13. Vayisa Moshe Yisrael miyam suf vayitzo midbar shur v'yechlu shloshet yamim. 3 days. That's all it took. 3 days. The honeymoon is over. Shloshet yamim v'lo matzu mayim. There was no water. They came to Mara. They couldn't drink the water because it was bitter. Al ken korashma Mara. They complained against Moshe. It's interesting. It doesn't say yet they complained against God. They complained against Moshe. And they say, Manishta, what are we going to drink? V'yitzak el Hashem. V'yirei Hashem eitz. V'yishlach el hamayim. V'yimteku hamayim. Sham sam l'chol mishpat. V'sham nisal. So some kind of impressive thing takes place. So they take the stick and it goes in the water. It sweetens the water. But also this turn of phrase, Sham sam l'chol mishpat, we don't begin to understand why this is here. This is Mara, and we have a tradition that at Mara we receive some laws. Now, why? I mean, what is happening here? This should be the beginning of our problem. The beginning. Pasuk Vav V'haya im shemoa tishma lekol Hashem. If you're going to listen to the voice of God, Hashem Elokecha, v'hayashar be'einav ta'aseh, v'hazanta lemitzvotav, v'shomarta kol chukav. Now, I hope you noticed something which, first of all, it's so obvious, but it's too obvious, so therefore you can't really say it, but it's there. And then you think, are my eyes playing tricks on me? Is my mind playing tricks on me? So what am I referring to? Okay, so what I'm referring to is that we just now had a verse. Pasuk Kafei talked about the water got sweetened. Shamsam l'chol mishpat. There they got chol mishpat, which we have no idea what it's talking about. And then it continues and it says, Im shamoa tishma l'kol Hashem Elokecha. That should remind us of something. What should that remind us of? The second, right? Vayam Shmo is the second parsha of Shema. Vayashor beinav taseh v'zanta lemitzvotav. And it says, and you listen to the commandments. V'shamarta kol chukav. And again, we're doubling back on what we had in the previous verse. Then there's going to be, let's really be honest over here about what we're seeing. By the splitting of the sea, we were privileged to see Hayad HaGdolah. And what happened when we saw the Yad HaGdolah? We saw Midah Keneged Midah. How do you translate that into English? Proportional, right? It's proportional punishment for what was done. And over here we're told that if you follow the laws, there will be consequences. Then kol machal shamtim mitzrayim lo simalecha. So it's talking again about a midah keneged midah, or I'll say perform mitzvot. There will be schar. It's about kabbalat mitzvot and schar. Continue next chapter, source 14, Perek Ted Zayin. They travel from there and they arrive. So now you realize that was 3 days, and now altogether now 1 month has gone by. So they carried out apparently enough matzah for a month. So what's worse than matzah? Month-old matzah. So I guess they had matzah b'rai for a while. V'yilinu kol adap b'nei Yisrael Moshe v'al Aaron b'midbar, and they complained to Emerlein b'nei Yisrael mi'itein mutenu b'yad Hashem. So this is the first time we hear something. Is it the first time? Had we only died Beretz Mitzrayim, b'shiftenu al-sir basar. The first time was, what are we going to drink? Now is, had we only died, we used to eat b'chlenu lechem l'sova. We had so much food, and we ate it to the point of being sated. And you're taken out of this place, l'hamit kol hakahal hazeh b'ra'av. V'yom Hashem Moshe, neni mamtir lachem lechem bin hashamayim. There's a machloket, what bracha you say on man. One of the opinions is, you say, hamotzi lechem bin hashamayim. I said, that's one of the opinions, it's machloket, what you say. So one of them is, hamotzi, some say shakel, some say mizonot, right? Because it is filling, and some say, no, hamotzi lechem bin hashamayim, because of this pasuk over here. When you get man, and maybe it depends what you imagine it to be. When you get man, you'll let me know, and we'll. When we get the man, we'll figure it out. But yet, yes. V'yatza ha'am v'laktu dvar yom b'yomo leman anasenu. That's really interesting. Leman anasenu. Hayelech b'torati imlo. So God just showed his hand in such an interesting way. What did I say from the very beginning? I said two things. One is, I said it could have taken us directly from leaving Egypt to Har Sinai, and we never would have noticed anything was missing. I mean, that's the thing. And they arrived by Sinai, that's it. But then I said the other problem that we have is because the problem of logistics and the problem of supplies. But it said something really interesting, that this whole thing is about not what you thought it was. God is saying that there is an educational objective to this, there's a religious objective to this, and this word leman anasenu, in order to test you, it could be to lift you. Hayelech b'torati imlo. Now the important thing to me is that the word Torah is being mentioned over here. Again, we have chok or mishpat, and you can say, what are you talking about? We don't get the Torah till Sinai. What are we doing over here talking about Torah over here? V'yah b'yom hashishi v'chinu et asher yaviu v'yah mishneh al asher yilkutu yom. And God tells that on the sixth day there will be this double. Moshe b'nei Israel, Moshe Aaron b'nei Israel, erev yadatim ki Hashem hotzi etchem me'eretzayim. And you will know, again here it goes from emunah to yedi'ah, you will know that it was God who took you out of Egypt. Uvoker re'itim kavod Hashem b'shamut, you're going to see again the glory of God, and so on. So we're going to skip a little bit more over here. And we get to pasuk Yud. V'hikdvar Aaron hakol adap b'nei Yisrael v'yifnu el hamidbar v'yikavod Hashem nirab anan. And God's glory appeared in the Nanan, which, by the way, we're back to the Zekeli Van Vehu kind of thing. Now there's this glory. Source 15, which takes us to the next chapter. What happens? On Friday, lo and behold, double amount falls. And what does Moshe say? Hu asher diber Hashem Shabbaton. Shabbat Kodesh Lashem Machar. It's Shabbat. Now this for us is a little bit perplexing because this is what God had told. So presumably, again, simplest level, that Moshe had been told already there'll be a double portion on Friday, and presumably because Shabbat, the mun factory is closed, right? Union, right? No mun factory, no mun falls on Shabbat. And I am going back to my point about what knowledge do they have in terms of creation and other things, but let's just continue a little bit. And we know that what happened with the man, again, you can read through all this description here, is that if they took too much, then it went bad overnight. And now they're told to take double and nothing's going to fall in the morning. And Moshe says, Ichlu hayom ki Shabbat hayom Lashem. Right? 6 days you'll gather, v'yom hashvi Shabbat lo yebo. V'yibiyom hashvi yatzu min ha'am l'kot v'lo matzu, v'yom Hashem el Moshe ad anna ma'antem l'shmor mitzvotai v'torotai. Until now even they refuse to follow my laws and my Torah. And again, my perception would have been, skip over all of this, go straight to Sinai. We get the Torah at Sinai, but we're seeing something really interesting, and that is we are receiving Torah beforehand, but in a really compelling kind of way. What I mean is that it's not an abstract, oh yeah, by the way, 6 days, no, this is 6 days the month falls. They're experiencing this. 7th day it doesn't fall. If you took too much on Wednesday, there was nothing, it would all be spoiled on Thursday. You took too much on Friday, you took double on Friday, then you have food to eat on Shabbat. They are receiving instruction in Shabbat in a very real way. And apparently, that's what's needed right now as we move further. Now, I'm going to say what I said in the beginning. There's a much larger issue over here which is taking place. I still want to try to identify it. Give me a couple more seconds, and we're going to try to get there.
There's a reason why they had to experience Shabbat before getting the Torah that explained why the context, for lack of a better word.
And that's what it sounds like. And that is indeed what it sounds like.
It seems like a nice way of introducing people to Judaism.
Yes. Rav Amital had spoken about this in terms of Rav Amital talked about this in terms of Marah. At the very end, they're told about the future. Like you take them and put them in a time capsule. Right? Pasuk Lamdad. V'nicho Aaron lefnei Aidut l'mishmer v'nei Yisrael achlu et haman 40 shana ad boam el eretz no shavet. Et man achlu ad boam el k'tzei eretz Canaan. Again, if you want to talk about anticipation of the future, completely over here. Okay, so as I said, we still now have to try to work a couple of things out. The Ibn Ezra in 16 says, "V'tam," that it says, "V'torotai Hashem haralem tam haShabbat." God explained the reason for Shabbat. If you look at the Rabbi in 17, "Ve'efshar od shekara elu mitzvot tarot lefi she'ena kavana b'hem inyan mitzvot ha'elu ba'atzmoto, aval heim mechuvanot lahorot al dvrim acherim ki ilu tomar shemitzvat haShabbat hi laorot al chidush ha'olam o al yotziat mitzrayim gamkein." That the Shabbat is not just about Shabbat in terms of itself, it's about Shabbat in terms of a much broader context. God as creator, the God who did create the world. So now you see the Rabbi actually is reading that in right now, because over here it's about they're experiencing it, but it says, no, you haven't followed my mitzvotai v'torotai, instructions, the mitzvot and the instructions. So what is it? They're both, again, Ibn Ezra and the Rabbi are understanding it's not just about performance, it's about understanding, it's about theology, it's about that God created the world, it's about you were slaves in Egypt, and therefore this command is being introduced. It's also going to ultimately be a command which is connected to emunah, but let me just think. We will pause on that for now. 18 and 19 discuss a little bit, when exactly they were told about creation, at least according to Rashi, and that's what I have in source 19. He claims that this happens when they get to Sinai. But according to this, it gets pushed back a little bit earlier, that in terms of this whole Shabbat experience, which means, I don't even want to call it experience. What I want to call this is that the trip between Egypt and Sinai was an educational trip which had within it all kinds of messages and all kinds of experiences, and they were faith-building experiences or emunah-building experiences, and it was one that that Shabbat became a part of who they were. So let's just go now a little bit further, and I hope I can tie all of this up. In source number 20, we get to a problem. And what's the problem? That once again, they don't have water. So I noted this earlier. They don't get water, and they start complaining again. And Moshe is told to go up by the rock, and he's going to hit the rock, and so on. Well, now they're questioning, is God among us or not? Which you realize now that we've just now gone backwards considerably, and that's part of the problem. It's part of the problem of emunah is sustaining it, and sustaining it in the face of difficulties, in the face of challenges, certainly in the face of tragedy. How does one sustain emunah is something which now we see is part of the issue. And what comes immediately afterwards? Vayavo Amalek v'yilachem Yisrael b'refidim. And what's going to happen now is that he takes the Mateh Elokim in his hand, and Moshe's hands are once again going to become a part of the narrative. Ki yarim Moshe yado, it's going to be successful when his hands get heavy. And then, of course, it's going to say right afterwards, in Pasuk Yud Bet, what's it going to say? Nachon? You're with me. It's going to say, V'yihi yadav emunah abo hashemesh. So we have the word emunah coming right back into this again, which is, as I said again, it's really where we had started. And then we're told to write this down, put this ba'oznei Yehoshua, Ki yad al keska milchama laHashem b'Amalek midor dor, talking about God's hand. So, in order to really try to make all kinds of sense all out of this, let us, and it's at this point we're going to move a little bit quicker, so I apologize. So, but just note the following. Who is Amalek? Amalek is obviously the descendant of Esau. What is the anger that Esau has towards Yaakov? It goes back to something which is called the Bechorah. Who is the firstborn? Esau has no interest in being in the firstborn. Part of being a firstborn, I would presume, on the one hand, the firstborn is going to get a double portion of the land of Israel, or maybe even inherit the land of Israel. But being a firstborn is also going to be, maybe, to also become the one who's going to work as a Kohen, the one who's going to serve in the Beit HaMikdash or the Mishkan. Nonetheless, all of the benefits over here seem to be far in the future, and Esav is not really one who's interested in the future. Esav is much more interested in the here and now. Now that's important, because one of the things we've been talking about in terms of emunah is how it impacts your attitude towards the future. Avraham's emunah was right there immediately before the Brit Ben Abtarim, which talks about a 400-year deal. So how many people are really going to be able to sustain that type of emunah for 400 years? But that's exactly what we realize is the issue over here. But Esav really backs around from it. But he apparently has seller's regret, because that's why Amalek comes back. But I'm saying, just realize now that the Bechor is in the background. So the various themes that we've had all the way through emunah, we've had the theme of the Yad Hagdolah. We've had the theme of the firstborn. And I think that is enough to now note source 21. Yaakov sells the Bechorah to Esau. Vayivez Esav et Bechorah. So that's again the background of the whole hatred. Of course, it continues for other reasons, including Yaakov taking the brachot. Good. Source 22 is right before we started. It was the end of last week's parsha, Perek Yud Gimel. V'yidaber Hashem Moshe lemor kadesh li kol bechor. Now stop. I hope that you realize now that if at the end of this section we have Amalek coming back to fight with Yaakov, the Bechor was never that far behind us. Now the reason why you wouldn't have seen this is because you would have focused on the Bechor of Mitzrayim. But part of what happens in all this is that the Bechor becomes holy. It's the sanctification. It's the Kedusha. Kadesh li kol Bechor. So the Kedusha with the Bechor is the right kol B'Terechem and so on. But how does that section end up? Right, a couple verses later. V'hayalacha la'ot al yadcha ulizakaron bein einecha. And there somehow this morphs into tefillin. Right? How did tefillin get into this? Lamantia Torah Hashem beficha. Torah should be on your mouth. So we, as I said, let's go straight to Sinai, but we need to do some things to get to Sinai. Ki biyad chazaka hotziacha Hashem mitzrayim. Which means if you're going to ask me, Parshat Pshat, why do we wear tefillin? And the answer is to remember that God took us out of Egypt with a strong hand. Why would I say such a thing? Because the Torah just said it. That's what it said. Right afterwards, we have a second parsha of Shema. Right, you think about the four parshot in the tefillin. Of the tefillin. One was Kadesh Li Kol Bechor. Next one, Vayaki V'Yacha Hashem. It's about the land of Israel. So one is about the kedusha of the Bechor. Now is about the kedusha of Eretz Israel. Right, you're going to go in Vayaki Yeshecha Ben Chamachar Lema Mazot Marta Bechozek Yad Hotzianu Hashem. That God took us out with a strong hand. And then V'Haya La'ot Ayadcha L'Totavot Beinenecha Ki Bechozek Yad Hotzianu Hashem Mitzrayim. So I'm going to say it again. What's the purpose of the tefillin? To remember that God took us out with a strong hand, at least partially. Again, now, there are two parshot of Shema. The starting point of my whole shir today was my remembering of something I heard some 40 years ago, more or less, about the Rashbam in source number 23. This is the Rashbam was my starting point. So what is it that the Rashbam says? What does the Rashbam do? He argues that this is not really talking about tefillin over here, but rather it says it's talking about a concept that we need to teach. Why? Right? Amar lo kol parshas Yisrael omer livno. It's about giving over information. So the way it was taught to me was that we didn't have the other two parshiot yet. It can't be an instruction to wear tefillin. It would have been lopsided tefillin. They didn't have the two missing parshiot. What are the two missing parshiot? Shema and Vayaram Shemoah. Those are not introduced until Devarim. So therefore the Rashbam, again, that was the explanation of the Rashbam, is moved and said, no, you just tell over this stuff because it can't really be about implementing a mitzvah, which is not possible. So as I said, that was my starting point into all of this. So now, with 2 minutes left, more or less, I want to consider the following. One is the two missing parshiot, Shema and Yom Shemoah. I hope you noticed as I was talking today, appeared in the beginning of Parshat Beshalach. In source 24, we're told, Vayiru ha'am et Hashem. We should recognize those verses, right? That's right, we were at. Shana Rabboteinu, al koret Shema, tzarech laskir kriyat Yamsuf. Whenever you say Shema, you need to talk about kriyat Yamsuf. Again, when you daven, note, what is kriyat Yamsuf? What do we need it for? Umakot bechorim, be'emet v'yatziv. Makot bechorot, right, going back to Peter Echem, going back to the idea of splitting of the sea, all these things need to be said whenever you say Shema. They have to be part of the Birkat of Kriyat Shema. Why? Well, the answer should be obvious sooner rather than later. Shenemar lantis Mitzrayim, Uma ben Yitziat Mitzrayim leKriyat Yamsuf, and we're going to skip a little bit, but I hope that you're understanding the theme. When we get to source 25, that's Vayam Shemoah, and you notice, of course, in it talks about the tefillin are there as well, right? La'ota yedchem v'yulto b'nechem. In source 26, which is really could have been before the Shema, and afterwards it says Ukshartim la'ota yadecha v'yulto b'nechem. Shema Yisrael begins with Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, which is a statement, I guess, this greatest statement of emunah that we have. At the end of the Shira, in source 27, Tevi'emu v'tita'emu b'har nachlatcha, mechon l'shivtecha pa'alot Hashem, mikdash Hashem konu yadecha, Hashem yimloch li'olam va'ed. Rashi explains Hashem yimloch li'olam va'ed, towards the bottom, Bizman sh'Hashem yimloch li'olam va'ed, latid lavo shekol hamlucha shelo. Rashi understands that, again, the emunah that they just now got was towards the future. Rashi on Shema, Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, writes, Hu atid liot Hashem Echad, shenemar ki azafoch et amim safa brura, and so on. V'yomo hu yeh Hashem Echad, u'shmo Echad. So, as I said, I just ran the risk of everyone not understanding about what it is that I wanted to say. So let me make sure that you do. In Az Yashir, we have this Zekeli Van Vehu. We have a Gilui Shechina. By the way, what do we do when we say the Shema? We cover our eyes. And why do we cover our eyes? Because there's a Gilui Shechina. It's because the Shema, when we say the Shema, it's such a powerful prayer that the Shechina comes right there. It's like when the Birkat Kohanim, we cover our eyes as well. Over here we cover our eyes because the Shechina is there. Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad is something which causes a Gilui Shechina. Over here as well, by the Shira, it was Zeh Keli Van Vehu, and then Hashem Yimloch Lam Ba'ed. It's this understanding that God is king forever. When we say the Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, what did Rashi say? That means that we know it now, but it's going to be manifest all over the world, right? Hashem Yimloch Lam Ba'ed. Which means, what exactly is the Shema? It's Kabbalat Ol Malchut Shemayim. That's what it is. Understanding that God is king. Hashem Yimloch Lilam Va'ed. That's the reason why in Rosh Hashanah, after you say all the Malchiot, what's the final one? Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. It's the one Malchiot that doesn't have this Melech. But that's Malchiot, is knowing that there's one God. Now it's interesting, some of your Sidurim will have at the end of Az Yashir, Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. Some will have it in parentheses and some won't have it. Now, some of the commentaries will say, oh, it's a mistake. It was there from Rosh Hashanah at the end, right after this. It may not be a mistake, because the purpose over here is the same purpose. And what is it? We're missing two parshiot of tefillin. What are they? One is Kabbalat Al Malchut Shemayim. That happens with the splitting of the sea. Zekeli v'navehu, Hashem Yimloch Lam Ba'ed. That's Kabbalat Al Malchut Shemayim. So what's the other thing that we're still missing? Kabbalat Mitzvot. And Schar Va'onish. What do we have throughout the rest of the parsha? Kabbalat mitzvot together with schar v'onesh, which means we already had an introduction to schar v'onesh, right? Reward and punishment, right there when we saw the splitting of the sea. That was manifest schar v'onesh in front of us. And then what happens afterwards? What happens afterwards is God is teaching us a lesson in Kabbalat mitzvot and schar v'onesh, which is that other chapter of Shema. Which what I'm saying is that once the tefillin were introduced, whether they put them on at that point or not, it's that the message of the tefillin with all four parshiot are actually here right now. The first two were there written clearly, right? About the firstborn and Ki Yaviacha, about Eretz Yisrael. Those are clear, those are there. But the next two are actually the next couple of topics which are being discussed. One is Kabbalat al Malchut Shemayim, to the point that, again, I'm not going to say you cover your eyes now, but you see Zekeli v'Anveyu, they see God manifest, but there's also this other issue about Schar v'Onesh, which is also staring at them, and then it's the Kabbalah of Mitzvot together with the Schar v'Onesh, and that takes us right through Mara with the things that taught, and most importantly in Shabbat. They're taught about Shabbat in terms of this idea of Kabbalat mitzvot with the absolute logic to it of that God will give you for 6 days and the seventh, but they're also told to be taught it. That was what the Rabbi said. Teach them why we have Shabbat. Teach them that God created the universe. Teach them that you were slaves in Egypt and God, meaning put God back into history, which becomes something which becomes completely manifest in your understanding, because that's ultimately what Emunah is. Emunah is, we'll go back to the beginning, Emunah is seeing something in the present, reinterpreting everything that happened in the past, and then having complete understanding and faith, belief, trust, moving forward into the future.